the secret the young Apache girl kept. Until the rancher discovered it, the ranch sat far from the main road, surrounded by dry land, low hills, and long stretches of open sky. Dust rose easily there, carried by the wind that never seemed to rest. The place was quiet most days, broken only by the sound of horses, cattle, and the steady work of a man who had learned to live with silence. The rancher was known as Mr. Callahan. He was not a loud man, nor a friendly one, but he was fair. People in the nearby town said he kept to himself because life had taken too much from him already. Years ago, he had lost his wife to illness, and since then, the ranch had become both his burden and his shelter. He worked from sunrise to sunset, believing that hard work was the only thing that kept painful memories from returning. The young girl arrived at the ranch one late afternoon, riding in the back of a neighbor's wagon. She did not speak much when she was introduced. She stood with her hands folded, her eyes lowered, her dark hair tied neatly behind her head. She was Apache, though no one said it out loud. In those days, labels carried weight, and silence often felt safer. Mr. Callahan noticed her calm first. Most children her age were restless, curious, or noisy. She was none of those things. She watched everything closely, as if learning the shape of the land, the sound of the wind, and the habits of the people around her. When she spoke, her voice was soft and her words were careful. She was there, the neighbor explained, because she needed work and a place to stay. Nothing more was said. Mr. Callahan did not ask questions. He had learned long ago that people carried their reasons like hidden scars. If they wanted to speak, they would. From the first day, the girl proved useful. She woke before the sun and helped with simple tasks, feeding the chickens, carrying water, mending small tears in cloth. She worked quietly and never complained, even when her hands grew sore or the sun burned her skin. She listened closely when instructions were given and followed them exactly. Still, there was something distant about her. She smiled politely but never laughed. She thanked people but never lingered. When evening came, she often sat alone near the fence, watching the horizon as the sky turned red and gold. It was during those moments that Mr. Callahan noticed the sadness in her eyes. It was not the sadness of a child missing home in a simple way. It was deeper, heavier, like a memory she carried every hour of the day. At night, the ranch grew quiet. Coyotes called in the distance and the wind moved through the grass. Mr. Callahan sometimes noticed that the girl did not sleep easily. On more than one occasion, he heard soft movement outside long after everyone else had gone to bed. When he looked out, he saw her standing near the edge of the land, facing the hills, as if listening for something only she could hear. She never explained where she went or why she stayed awake so late. When asked if she was tired, she simply nodded and returned to her work. Over time, small details began to stand out. She avoided mirrors and reflective surfaces, turning her face away when she passed a window. Loud voices made her stiffen, even when no anger was meant. And though she worked closely with others, she kept a careful distance, as if afraid that closeness might bring trouble. One afternoon, Mr. Callahan noticed a thin cord around her neck. It disappeared beneath her shirt, and she touched it often when she thought no one was watching. Once, when she leaned forward to lift a bucket, the cord slipped into view. At the end of it was a small carved piece of stone, worn smooth by time and handling. He did not ask about it, but he remembered it. The girl spoke little of her past. When someone asked where she had learned to work so well or why she knew certain skills uncommon for her age, she answered simply that she had learned them before. Her answers ended there, firm but polite. Despite her silence, she was kind. She helped the older hands without being asked and shared food with anyone who seemed hungry. When a horse was injured, she sat with it patiently, speaking soft words in a language no one else understood. The animal calmed under her touch and even missed her. Callahan, who had worked with animals his entire life, took notice. Days turned into weeks. The ranch settled into a steady rhythm, and the girl became part of it, though she never truly seemed to belong. She moved like someone passing through, careful not to leave marks behind. The town lay several miles away, and supplies had to be collected every so often. On one such trip, a town official noticed the girl standing near the wagon. His eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. He asked her name. She answered quickly, without hesitation, but something in her tone was wrong, too practiced, too controlled. The official nodded but looked unconvinced. As the wagon pulled away, the girl did not relax. Her shoulders remained tense until the town disappeared behind the dust. That night she barely ate. Mr. Callahan noticed. He said nothing, but his eyes followed her as she moved away from the fire and into the darkness. He wondered what fear could live so quietly inside someone so young. Later that week, he found her near the hills at dawn. She was kneeling, her head bowed, her hands wrapped around the stone at her neck. She did not see him at first. Her lips moved silently, as if in prayer or memory. When she finally noticed him, she stood quickly, her face carefully blank. "I was just watching the sun," she said. Mr. Callahan nodded. He had no proof otherwise, but that moment stayed with him. The land around the ranch had once belonged to many people before fences and roads changed it. Mr. Callahan knew this, though he rarely spoke of it. As he watched the girl walk back toward the house, her steps light but cautious, he felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest. It was not pity. It was concern. She was not simply a quiet worker looking for shelter. She was guarding something fragile, something that mattered enough to risk loneliness and silence. As the sun climbed higher and the day's work began, the girl returned to her tasks, just as she always did. To anyone else, she looked the same, calm, obedient, and distant. But to Mr. Callahan, the ranch no longer felt as quiet as it once had. Something hidden had arrived with her, and though he did not yet understand it, he sensed that this secret would not remain buried forever. The wind carried dust across the land, the same way it always had, but now it felt as if it carried questions too. And somewhere between the fences, the hills, and the quiet mornings, the first thread of a story had already begun to pull tight. Life on the ranch continued, but something had shifted. The days still began with the same early light and ended with the same quiet evenings, yet an unseen tension now moved through the air. Mr. Callahan felt it even when nothing seemed different. He found himself watching the young girl more closely, not out of suspicion, but out of a growing sense of responsibility he could not fully explain. The girl kept working as she always had. She rose before dawn, completed her tasks with care, and avoided drawing attention to herself. But her caution grew sharper. She looked over her shoulder more often. She paused when unfamiliar sounds reached the ranch. When riders passed on the distant road, she stopped what she was doing until they were gone. Mr. Callahan noticed these things because he had lived long enough to recognize fear that had learned how to hide. One afternoon, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Dark clouds gathered fast and the wind picked up, pushing dust and dry leaves across the land. The hands hurried to secure tools and animals. The girl was helping tie down supplies when thunder cracked loudly overhead. She froze. Her hands tightened around the rope, and for a moment she seemed unable to breathe. "It's just the storm," someone said nearby. She nodded, but her face had gone pale. When another loud sound followed, she stepped back suddenly and dropped the rope. She quickly bent to pick it up, embarrassed, and forced herself to keep working. No one laughed or spoke, but the moment did not go unnoticed. That night the storm passed, leaving the air heavy and still. Most people slept deeply after the long day. The girl did not. Mr. Callahan woke to the sound of movement outside. He sat up slowly and looked through the window. Moonlight showed a small figure moving toward the hills again. He sighed quietly, pulled on his boots, and followed at a distance. He did not want to frighten her. He stayed far enough back that she would not hear him, close enough to see her path. She walked with purpose, not wandering, as if she had walked this route many times before. When she reached a narrow rise overlooking the land, she stopped and sat on a flat rock. She took the stone from beneath her shirt and held it tightly. Even from where he stood, Mr. Callahan could see that it mattered deeply to her. She looked toward the distant horizon, where the land faded into darkness, and sat very still. He did not approach her. Instead, he turned back. Whatever she was doing, it was private, but his worry grew heavier. The next day, they traveled to town again. Supplies were running low, and the trip could not be delayed. The girl rode with them, her posture stiff, her hands folded tightly in her lap. As the buildings came into view, her breathing quickened. Mr. Callahan saw it and slowed the wagon slightly, giving her a moment to steady herself. In town, people went about their business. Some greeted Mr. Callahan with nods, others stared openly at the girl. Their eyes held curiosity, judgment, and questions they did not bother to hide. A man from the local office approached them near the store. He greeted Mr. Callahan politely, then turned to the girl. "I don't believe I've seen you before," he said. She answered calmly, giving the same name she had given before. Her voice did not shake, but her fingers curled tightly into her sleeve. The man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "And your family?" "They moved on," she replied quickly. He studied her face, then nodded. "You should be careful out here. Not everyone is honest." The girl nodded once. As soon as he walked away, she let out a slow breath she had been holding. On the ride back, she said nothing. When the ranch came into view, her shoulders finally relaxed. She helped unload supplies without being asked, moving as if she needed to stay busy to quiet her thoughts. Later that evening, Mr. Callahan found her near the barn, brushing one of the horses. The animal stood calmly, its head lowered, trusting her completely. "You're good with them," he said. She nodded. "They listen." "So do people," he replied gently. She paused, then continued brushing. "Not always." He considered his next words carefully. "If there's something troubling you, you don't have to face it alone." Her hand stopped moving. For a moment he thought she might speak. Instead, she stepped back and bowed her head slightly. "Thank you," she said, "but I'm fine." He did not push further. Days passed and more signs appeared. She avoided the main road completely now. She flinched when strangers came near the ranch. Once, when a rider approached unexpectedly, she disappeared into the tall grass and did not return until nightfall. Mr. Callahan began to ask himself questions he had avoided before. Who was she really? What was she running from? And how long could someone live like this, always watching, always waiting? One morning, he discovered something that deepened his concern. He went to the small storage room near the house and noticed a loose floorboard. When he lifted it, he found nothing valuable, just a small bundle wrapped carefully in cloth. He should not have touched it, but curiosity overcame him. Inside were a few simple items: a worn piece of fabric with traditional patterns, a small bead necklace, and a folded paper with markings he did not recognize. They were kept clean and protected, handled with care. He put everything back exactly as he found it. When he stepped outside, the girl was standing nearby. Her eyes widened for just a second before she lowered her gaze. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to," he replied truthfully. "I won't ask." She studied his face, searching for something. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you." From that moment on, a fragile trust formed between them. She did not share her secret, but she stopped disappearing as often. She stayed closer to the ranch, closer to the people who, without realizing it, had become her shelter. Still, danger felt close. Word traveled fast in small towns. Questions led to rumors, and rumors led to trouble. Mr. Callahan sensed that whatever she was hiding would not remain hidden forever. One evening, as the sun set and shadows stretched across the land, he watched her stand near the fence again, eyes fixed on the hills. Her face held both longing and fear. He understood then that her secret was not just about the past. It was about survival. And soon, he would be forced to decide whether to stay silent or step forward when it mattered most. The land remained quiet, but the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt like the pause before something changed. The days after that evening felt heavier, as if the land itself was waiting. The girl stayed close to the ranch, but her silence deepened. She spoke only when necessary and kept her eyes lowered when strangers passed nearby. "Mister." Callahan noticed how carefully she listened to every sound, how her body seemed ready to move at the smallest change. One afternoon, she did not return from her chores. At first, no one worried. She often took longer routes or helped animals farther out. But as the sun moved lower and her shadow never appeared near the house, concern began to grow. Mr. Callahan asked the others if they had seen her. No one had. The sky turned orange, then purple. Still, she did not return. Mr. Callahan saddled his horse without saying much. He followed the path toward the hills, the same direction she often took at night. The wind was calm, and the land felt unusually quiet. Even the birds had gone silent. As he rode, he noticed small signs, footprints where grass had been pressed down, stones moved aside in a careful pattern. She knew how to leave little trace, but she could not erase everything. He dismounted near a narrow trail that led deeper into the hills. The path was hidden unless you knew where to look. He followed it on foot, calling her name softly, not wanting to scare her. Then he heard voices. They were low and distant, carried by the wind. One was hers, the other belonged to someone older, Mr. Callahan slowed his steps and stayed behind a cluster of rocks. He did not mean to listen, but the words reached him clearly. They were speaking in Apache. He did not understand the language, but he understood the tone. There was urgency in her voice and gentle strength in the other. He saw them then, a small fire hidden between rocks, its light carefully covered. Sitting beside her was an elderly woman, her hair gray, her face lined by time and experience. The girl held the stone from her neck in her hands, speaking quickly now. The older woman listened, nodding, placing a steady hand over the girl's trembling fingers. Mr. Callahan's heart tightened. This was no secret meeting for mischief. This was family. He stepped forward slowly, making sure his presence was known. The firelight flickered across his face. The girl turned sharply, fear flashing in her eyes. She stood at once, placing herself between him and the older woman. "Please," she said in a shaking voice. "Don't tell." "I won't," he said quietly. "I promise." The older woman studied him closely. Her eyes were sharp, wise, and tired. After a moment, she spoke softly to the girl, who hesitated before lowering her hands. "She has been afraid," the older woman said in broken English. "For a long time," Mr. Callahan nodded. "I can see that." The girl looked down, tears forming despite her effort to stay strong. "I didn't want anyone to know," she said. "If they know who I am, they will take me away." "From where?" he asked gently. "From my life," she whispered. The older woman explained slowly. The girl had been separated from her family during a forced move. In the confusion, she had been sent far away under a different name. The stone she carried was a symbol of her people, given by her mother before they were separated. It was her proof of who she was and also her greatest risk. She had been hiding not because she wanted to disappear, but because she wanted to stay free. "Mr. Callahan listened without interrupting. Each word settled deep in his chest. He finally understood her fear, her silence, her careful distance from everyone. "I didn't come to expose you," he said. "I came because I was worried." The girl looked at him, searching his face. "You could tell them," she said. "They would believe you." "I won't," he repeated. "No one should lose their life just for being who they are." The older woman nodded slowly. "Then you are a good man." The fire was put out carefully, and they walked back toward the ranch together. The girl stayed close to Mr. Callahan, her steps uncertain but lighter than before. For the first time since he had known her, she did not walk like someone running. Back at the ranch, nothing looked different, yet everything had changed. Over the next few days, the girl spoke a little more. Not about everything, but enough. She told him about her mother's voice, her people's songs, the land she once knew. She spoke of how fear had taught her to stay quiet, to stay small. Mr. Callahan listened. He did not offer solutions he could not promise. He offered honesty and protection where he could. But secrets have a way of traveling. A rider arrived from town one morning, bringing news that officials were asking questions again. Names were being checked. Records were being searched. Someone had noticed inconsistencies. The girl heard the news and went still. Her hands shook as she tied the rope she had tied 100 times before. "They're coming," she said quietly. Mr. Callahan felt the weight of the moment settle on him. Protecting her would not be easy. Staying silent might no longer be enough. That night the girl packed her small bundle. She moved quietly, carefully, as if she had practiced this many times before. When Mr. Callahan found her near the barn, her eyes were wet but determined. "I have to leave," she said, "before it's too late." He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how young she truly was. "You shouldn't have to run anymore," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I don't have a choice." He thought of his wife, of the promises he had failed to keep, of the years he had spent avoiding responsibility because it hurt too much. Now, responsibility stood in front of him, asking for courage. "You can stay," he said firmly. "If they come, they'll deal with me first." She stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "Because some things matter more than comfort," he said, "and some people matter more than fear." The girl did not answer. She simply stepped forward and hugged him quickly, tightly, as if afraid the moment might vanish. The wind moved softly across the land that night. The hills stood silent witnesses to a truth no longer hidden. The secret had been discovered, not with force, but with understanding. And now, both of them waited, knowing that the choice made next would change everything. Morning arrived slowly, as if the sun itself was unsure about rising. A pale light spread across the land, touching the fences, the barn, and the quiet house. Mr. Callahan was already awake. He had barely slept. Every sound during the night had pulled him from shallow dreams, his thoughts circling the same question again and again. What happens when they come? The girl woke early too. She moved quietly, packing and unpacking the same small bundle, unable to settle. The stone rested in her palm, warm from her touch. She had not run during the night, even though she had expected to. Part of her hoped she would not have to. Breakfast passed in silence. The other hands noticed the tension but did not ask questions. People who lived hard lives learned when silence was safer than curiosity. By mid-morning, dust rose on the distant road. The girl saw it first. Her breath caught and she froze where she stood. The dust cloud grew larger, slower, steady. Horses, more than one. "They're here," she whispered. Mr. Callahan stepped beside her. He placed himself slightly in front of her without thinking. "Go inside," he said calmly. "No," she replied, surprising both of them with the strength in her voice. "I won't hide." He turned to look at her. She stood straighter than he had ever seen her, fear still present but no longer in control. "All right," he said, "stay close." The riders reached the gate and stopped. Two officials dismounted, their faces serious but not cruel. One of them was the man from town. His eyes moved across the ranch, then settled on the girl. "We need to ask some questions," he said. "You can ask me," Mr. Callahan replied. The official nodded. "We have reason to believe there's someone here who may not be listed under the correct name." The girl felt her heart pound, but she did not step back. She reached up and touched the stone beneath her shirt, grounding herself. "She works here," Mr. Callahan said. "That's all you need to know." "That may not be enough," the man replied. "There are records missing. People displaced, orders to follow." "Orders change," Mr. Callahan said evenly. "People don't." The official studied him. "You're asking us to ignore procedure." "I'm asking you to see a person," Mr. Callahan answered. "A young one who has done nothing wrong." The second official shifted uncomfortably. He glanced at the girl, really looked at her, not as a name or a problem, but as someone standing in the open air, hands shaking despite her effort to stay strong. "She's afraid," he said quietly. "She has reason to be, mister." Callahan replied. The moment stretched. The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere a horse snorted softly. The girl stepped forward. "My name is not the one you have," she said. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. "I was given another to keep me safe. I did not lie to harm anyone. I only wanted to live." The officials exchanged glances. This was not the scene they had expected. There was no anger here, no running, no fight. Only truth spoken plainly. The man from town cleared his throat. "There are laws." "There is also fairness," Mr. Callahan said. "If you take her now, you take her back into fear. If you leave her, you give her time. Time to reconnect with her people. Time to choose." Silence followed, long and heavy. Finally, the second official sighed. "We didn't come to break lives today." The first man hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We'll report that we found nothing conclusive." The girl's knees nearly gave way. She caught herself, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The riders left as quietly as they had come. The dust settled behind them, and with it, the fear that had lived in the air for weeks. Mr. Callahan did not move for a long moment. When he finally turned, the girl was crying openly now, her face buried in her hands. "It's over," she asked. "For now," he said gently. "But this isn't the end of your path." She nodded. She had known that. Over the next days, a new calm settled over the ranch. It was not perfect peace, but it was real. The girl laughed for the first time one evening while feeding the chickens. The sound startled her, then made her smile wider. She began speaking more openly about her people, her language, the stories her mother once told her. "Mr. Callahan listened, learning a history the land itself seemed to remember. Word came quietly that surviving members of her family had been found farther south. The elderly woman from the hills had carried messages carefully, patiently. The girl held the letter with shaking hands. Hope and fear mixed together inside her. "You don't have to go," Mr. Callahan said, though his voice was thick. "I do," she replied softly, "but I'm not running this time." The morning she left, the sky was clear. She packed her few belongings, the stone resting safely against her heart. She hugged each of the hands goodbye, thanking them in her quiet way. When she reached Mr. Callahan, she paused. "You gave me more than shelter," she said. "You gave me a choice." He nodded. "You gave me something too, a reason to stand up when it mattered." She smiled, then turned toward the road, walking steadily, no longer looking over her shoulder. Mr. Callahan watched until she disappeared from sight. The ranch felt quieter again, but not empty. The land had witnessed fear, courage, and kindness, and it remembered. Somewhere beyond the hills, a young girl was finally walking toward her future, not in hiding, but in truth. The ranch felt different after the girl left. The mornings were still quiet, the work still demanding, but something important was missing. Mr. Callahan noticed it in small ways. There was no soft movement near the fence at dawn. No careful footsteps in the dust that showed someone had been awake before everyone else. The land was the same, yet it felt emptier. For the first few days, he kept expecting to see her. When he heard the wind brush against the barn, he turned his head. When a horse grew restless, he waited for her calm voice. Each time he remembered she was gone, and the truth settled deeper into his chest. He did not regret helping her, not for a single moment. Work continued. Cattle needed tending. Repairs could not wait. Life, as always, moved forward, but now, as Mr. Callahan worked, he thought more than he used to. He thought about the choices people made when fear stood in the way. He thought about how easy it was to look away, and how hard it was to stand firm. Some evenings he walked toward the hills alone. He stood where the girl once sat, looking out over the land as the sky changed color. He imagined her somewhere far away, walking with purpose, not hiding, not running. Weeks passed. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was carried by a rider who said little and left quickly. Mr. Callahan held the envelope for a long moment before opening it. He recognized the careful writing at once. She wrote simply. She said she had found her family, not all of them but enough. An aunt, 2 cousins, elders who remembered her mother and spoke her name with kindness. She wrote about the tears, the stories shared late into the night, and the way it felt to belong again. She thanked him again, not for saving her but for trusting her. Mr. Callahan read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it where he kept the few things that mattered most. The ranch hands noticed the change in him. He spoke more now, not much but enough. He listened better too. When someone struggled, he noticed. When someone needed time, he gave it. The land, in its quiet way, responded. The horses were calm. The work felt lighter. It was as if kindness had settled into the soil. Months later, another letter came. This one spoke of learning, of teaching younger children the old songs, of helping elders with daily tasks. She wrote that she was no longer afraid when strangers passed. She still stayed cautious, but fear no longer ruled her steps. "I know who I am now," she wrote, "and I know where I belong." Mr. Callahan smiled when he read that line. He realized something important then. Helping her had changed him too. He was no longer just surviving his days. He was living them with purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he sat on the porch and watched the horizon. The wind carried familiar sounds. The land stretched wide and patient, holding stories older than any fence. He thought about the moment he chose to speak up, the moment he chose to stand in front of fear instead of stepping aside. That choice had not only protected someone else. It had healed a part of him he thought was lost forever. Years passed. The ranch remained steady and quiet. People came and went. Seasons changed. But the memory of the girl stayed, not as a weight but as a reminder. Sometimes new workers arrived with their own silences, their own guarded eyes. Mr. Callahan treated them with fairness and patience. He had learned that everyone carried something unseen. One spring morning, another visitor arrived. This time, it was her. She stood at the gate, older now, stronger, her posture confident. The stone still rested at her neck, but it no longer felt like a secret. It felt like pride. Mr. Callahan walked toward her, disbelief and warmth mixing in his chest. "I came back to see you," she said, smiling. "You look well," he replied. "I am," she said simply. They walked the land together. She spoke of her work, her plans, her hopes. She thanked him again, but he shook his head. "You did the hard part," he said. "You chose to live your truth." She looked at the hills, then back at him. "You helped me believe I could." They parted that day with a quiet understanding. Their lives had crossed for a reason, and that was enough. As she walked away, Mr. Callahan felt peace settle over him. Not the quiet of loneliness, but the quiet of knowing he had done what was right. The ranch stood strong under the open sky. The wind moved gently across the land, carrying stories forward. And somewhere, because of one choice made with courage and compassion, a life continued freely, honestly, and without fear. That was the secret that mattered most.